They kicked her in the stomach, in a dark corridor behind the armory. 3 against 1. Called it a lesson. But here's the thing about hitting a Navy SEAL. They don't forget. And Lieutenant Commander Rena Carter? She didn't need to. Before we show you what happens when patience becomes a weapon, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Because this story doesn't end with an apology. It ends with a drill nobody saw coming. The heat at Camp Eagle Run didn't build. It just existed. By 7 in the morning, the asphalt shimmered. Dust hung in the air like it had nowhere else to go. 2 flags, Navy and Marine Corps, snapped against their poles above the prefab barracks, both sun-faded at the edges, both making that hollow metal sound every few seconds. Lieutenant Commander Rena Carter stepped out of the tan government pickup and let the door close behind her. Not slam, just close. Her boots hit gravel, and she stood there a second, scanning the compound the way you scan terrain before you enter it. Crisp fatigues, sleeves rolled to her forearms, black case file under one arm, sidearm on her hip, no entourage, no announcement. Just 38 years of knowing how to walk into a place without asking permission. 2 instructors leaned against the admin trailer near the entrance, sharing a water bottle. One of them elbowed the other when she passed. That the SEAL liaison? Thought she was benched. Back injury or something. Rena heard them. Didn't turn. Just kept walking past a parked Humvee, ducked under a flapping shade tarp, and headed for the main office. Captain Lowe was waiting inside by the whiteboard. Mid-40s, square shoulders, clean uniform. He started to extend his hand, then seemed to think better of it and just nodded. Lieutenant Commander Carter, appreciate you making the trip out. She nodded back. Schedule said 0700. I'm early. He gave a tight smile. We run things sharp out here. Good. He gestured to the map behind him, gridded in orange and blue marker. You're here to observe, not interfere. That clear? I'm not here to babysit, she said. I'm here to verify safety protocol and instructor conduct during the next 4 drill phases. Hand to hand first. My notes go to interbranch command. Lowe exhaled through his nose. Fine by me. He tapped a roster pinned to the board. Corporal Santos runs the yard. Loud, but the recruits follow him. Miller and Greer back him up. Watch Santos if you're watching anyone. I watch everyone. Fair enough. They stepped outside into the heat. Already pushing 95. Across the compound, recruits were lining up on the sand lot, some still adjusting flak vests. An instructor barked orders from the ring, broad through the shoulders, too much voice for the space. That's Santos, Lowe said. Rena didn't answer. Santos noticed them and gave a lazy half wave. That the SEAL desk jockey? He called out, grinning. Rena looked at him. Didn't smile, didn't nod, just looked. The way you look at a structure you're about to clear. Angles, posture, habits. Santos held her gaze a beat too long, then turned back to his recruits. Lowe cleared his throat. You'll be stationed out of Ops Trailer B. Evaluation starts at 1400. She nodded once. One more thing, Lowe added, voice dropping slightly. Santos and his crew, they're good at what they do, but they run their section like a kingdom. Don't expect them to roll over for paperwork. Rena met his eyes. I'm not here for them to roll over. I'm here to make sure they're teaching what they're supposed to teach. Lowe studied her for a moment, then gave a short nod. Fair enough. She walked toward the distant ring, her shadow trailing long behind her in the dust. From the shade of the admin trailer, she could hear Santos's voice carrying across the compound. Louder now, performing for someone. Probably noticed she was watching. Let him perform. She'd seen 100 versions of him. The kind who mistook volume for authority. Who believed respect was something you took instead of something you built. No rush, no hesitation. Where others brought noise, Rena Carter brought something else entirely. Stillness. The yard was cooking by mid-afternoon, no breeze, just the crack of cadence calls and the occasional thud of bodies hitting mat. A rectangular shade cloth stretched above the sparring area, corners pulling tight on rusted poles. Beneath it, blue mats absorbed heat like a griddle. Recruits lined up in pairs, sweat darkening their shirts, waiting their turn. Rena stood at the edge, arms behind her back. She didn't speak, didn't move, just watched. Corporal Santos paced the front row like he owned it. No flinching, no retreat. If your lungs work, your body better follow. His voice cracked through the quiet like a whip. The recruits responded with effort, if not skill. Sloppy footwork, lunges that collapsed before contact, arms swinging wild instead of controlled. Reyna watched their feet, too many heels lifting, breathing out of rhythm, panic disguised as aggression. On the third pairing, she stepped forward. Stop! The two Marines froze mid-grapple. Reyna knelt. You're locking your shoulder before you breathe. That'll get you dropped. Reset. Breathe first, move second. One of them nodded. The other, a kid who couldn't have been more than 19, glanced towards Santos for approval. Santos didn't give it. Instead, he turned to the rest of the formation. Everybody stay in position. Don't reset unless I tell you to reset. The recruit looked confused, caught between two orders. Reyna stood slowly, her voice still calm. Corporal, I just gave him a correction. He needs to reset his stance before continuing. And I'm telling him to hold, Santos said, stepping closer. This is my yard, Commander. My recruits, my cadence. The air shifted. Some of the instructors straightened. A few recruits exchanged glances. Reyna didn't raise her voice. Your yard, my evaluation. If you're teaching improper form, I document it. That's why I'm here. Santos's jaw flexed. For a second, it looked like he might push it further. Then he gave a tight smile and waved his hand. Fine. Reset. Happy? She didn't answer, just returned to her spot and kept writing. But now the recruits weren't just drilling. They were watching, trying to figure out who actually held the authority. He walked over, mirrored sunglasses, hiding his eyes. Appreciate the coaching, ma'am, but we teach real combat here. Breathing patterns don't mean much when someone's already on your back. Reyna stood slowly. They mean everything. Breathing tells your brain not to panic. Panic gets you dropped faster than any punch. Respectfully, Santos said, this isn't some poolside SEAL assessment. We're not holding our breath in a tank. She didn't reply. Petty Officer Miller chuckled from across the yard. Must be from the manual. The Controlled Exhale chapter. Greer joined in. Next, you'll have us meditating before takedowns. A few recruits laughed, nervous, unsure if they were allowed. Reyna wrote something in her notebook. One of the younger recruits, wide-eyed, uncertain, glanced between her and Santos like he was trying to figure out which way the wind was blowing. She said nothing, just stepped back to her spot and kept watching. 4 more pairings, 3 unsafe grip structures, 1 hyperextended arm that wasn't corrected. Miller leaned towards Santos and whispered loud enough to be heard. Bet she logs how many times we blink too. Santos grinned. Paper SEALs write good reports. That's about it. Reyna made no response, but she kept writing. Not just notes, names, times, breaches. Behind the calm stood a ledger, and every breath she took added another line to it. By the time the sun dropped behind the motor pool, Camp Eagle Run had turned rust-colored. The yard quieted, trays scraped, voices murmured from the mess tent. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, throwing pale glare on aluminum tables scarred by years of use. Reyna sat near the back, alone. Her meal sat untouched beside an open case file. She reviewed the day's notes line by line, each infraction circled, each timestamp precise. Around her, conversation rolled, recruits bragging about bruises, instructors replaying takedowns that hadn't been theirs. She didn't join in, just sipped water, posture straight. The tent door slapped open. Santos, Miller, and Greer walked in, still half-dressed from drills. Fatigues unbuttoned at the throat, boots muddy. They carried energy that wanted an audience. A few tables turned automatically. Santos spotted her first. Well, look at that. Command royalty graces the chow line. Miller grabbed a tray. Wonder if she eats regulation portions too. Greer piled mashed potatoes. Heard SEALs get steak at Pendleton. Guess she's slumming it tonight. Reyna didn't look up. You boys done? Santos pulled out the bench across from her and sat without asking. Just curious, ma'am. Never met a liaison who showed up for field chow. Thought your kind preferred air-conditioned reports? Miller dropped beside him. What's it like being the one SEAL who writes evaluations instead of making them? She closed the folder. Keeps the noise down. Greer leaned an elbow on the table. That true you got pulled from ops for a back injury? Or was it attitude? She looked up then, steady, expressionless. Both heal slower than ego? The smirk faltered, just for a second. Enough for a recruit 2 tables over to notice. Santos recovered fast. Don't get touchy, Commander. Just breaking the ice. Team building. Rena stood, sliding her folder under one arm. You're in uniform. Act like it. The line landed quiet, not loud, but it shifted the air. Conversations at nearby tables stilled. Even the clatter of trays dimmed. Miller laughed too quickly. Yes, ma'am, he said, mock saluting with a fork. She stepped past him. As she did, he rose just enough to shoulder check her, casual, deliberate. A hollow thud against her ribs. Rena didn't flinch, didn't break stride. She turned her head slightly. Enjoy your meal, Corporal. Then she was gone, through the flap, into the night wind that smelled like fuel and sand. Behind her, the laughter came again, smaller now, uncertain, and though no one could see her face, those who'd caught the brief stillness in her posture knew something had shifted. The barracks hallway was empty when she returned to her bunk. Single room, narrow, with a metal desk and a lamp that flickered when the generator kicked on. She sat on the edge of the cot and opened her case file again. Not to log the shoulder check, that was small, petty, but to review the training schedule. Phase 3 protocols had been sitting in the manual for 2 years. Most camps skipped them. Too time-consuming, too exposing for instructors who'd built their reputations on swagger instead of skill. But Captain Lowe had signed off on full implementation 3 months ago. She'd seen the paperwork. Every instructor was required to demonstrate mastery of breath control techniques before teaching recruits the same. Required, not optional. She traced her finger down the page, found the clause buried in Section 7. Asterisk instructors who fail to meet evaluation standards will be suspended from active teaching duties pending remediation. She set the folder down and stared at the ceiling. Outside, boots echoed past her door, voices fading toward the showers. They thought she was just paperwork. A desk seal, with a clipboard and a grudge. Let them think it. Tomorrow they'd learn what discipline actually looked like. The quiet wasn't retreat, it was timing. The wind picked up after lights out, pushing dust through every seam. Most of the compound had gone dark. Only the armory strip still hummed, floodlights painting white corridors across concrete. Rena moved through that corridor, clipboard tucked under one arm, checking inventory logs. Routine work no one volunteered for. The steel door behind her shut with a hollow thud that echoed off cinder block. When she turned the corner, 3 shapes peeled out of shadow. Santos first, grin already waiting, Miller and Greer half a step behind. Evening, Commander, Santos said. Didn't peg you for the late shift type. Rena kept walking. Checking storage. You should be in quarters. Couldn't sleep, Miller said. Too much excitement after the mess. She didn't slow. Then run laps. Santos sidestepped to block the hall. Close enough she could smell sweat and coffee. You keep talking like you outrank someone. Her voice stayed level. Step aside, Corporal. He didn't. The grin widened. See? We're all about teamwork here. Thought maybe you could show us one of those SEAL breathing tricks. Greer snorted. Yeah, like when you're pinned and can't move. How's that work again? Miller laughed under his breath. The sound filled the narrow space. Rena's jaw tightened. Once. Walk away. All of you. Santos leaned closer, tone changing. You think you can waltz in here, write your reports, make us look bad? Out here, respect isn't ink and signatures. It's earned. Then earn it somewhere else. The lights buzzed overhead. The hum deepened. No one moved. Then Miller nudged Santos. Come on, man. She's not worth... But Santos was already moving. A shove. Hard. Open-handed. Against her shoulder. She caught herself. One boot sliding half an inch across concrete. Her eyes lifted to meet his. Still steady. That was your warning, she said quietly. He sneered. Here's mine. The kick came fast. Up from the hip. Boot heel into her stomach. The sound wasn't loud, just the dull, wet thud of contact. Then the quick exhale of air leaving lungs. She folded halfway, one knee touched down, both hands braced on the floor. The clipboard clattered against the wall. For a heartbeat, she couldn't breathe. Pain radiated outward from the impact point, sharp at first, then spreading into a deep ache that made her ribs feel like they were closing in. Her diaphragm spasmed, tried to pull air that wouldn't come. The edges of her vision flickered. She heard Santos breathing above her, heard Miller shift his weight nervously, heard Greer mutter something she couldn't make out through the ringing in her ears. Her training kicked in before her mind did. Don't fight the breathlessness. Let the body reset. Count. 1, 2, 3. Air came back in a thin stream. Not enough, but enough. She focused on the concrete beneath her palms. Cold, solid, real. 4, 5. The pain leveled out. Still there, but manageable. Santos stepped back, chest heaving. Miller muttered, "Damn, man!" but didn't stop him. Rena straightened slowly. One hand pressed to her stomach. Breath came shallow but measured. Her gaze locked on Santos's face. No rage, just focus. He looked away first. "Come on," he said to the others. "She got the message." Their boots echoed down the hall, laughter trailing off into nothing. When the sound died, only the hum of the lights remained. Rena stayed where she was, breathing through her nose until the pain settled into rhythm. She reached for the clipboard, smoothed the crumpled page. Her hand trembled once, then stilled. She stood, shoulders square, and walked toward the floodlight at the far end of the hall. Her silhouette cut through the glare, small, upright, steady. Behind her, dust swirled in slow circles, catching light before the corridor swallowed it. The sun hadn't cleared the horizon when Rena entered the locker room. Empty. Rows of green metal lockers, fluorescent bulbs flickering above mirrors that hadn't been cleaned in weeks. The place smelled like disinfectant, sand, and gun oil. She stood in front of one mirror, unbuttoned her outer layer. The undershirt beneath had a darkening blotch along the lower abdomen, just left of center, where the boot had landed. It wasn't swollen yet, but the bruise had bloomed overnight. Dull blue edge, deep red center. She didn't wince, just touched it once, assessing pressure, then reached into her duffel for the wrap. Black, breathable, wide. She wound it around her midsection in smooth loops, pinned it tight, not to hide pain, to stabilize breath. A motion sensor caught her shift. The lights kicked up to full brightness. She looked at herself for a long moment. Then the memory came. Underwater qualification, Coronado. 3rd hour of the test. Mask stripped, hands bound. Salt water in her ears, lungs screaming. The instructors holding her under, releasing only to bark commands she couldn't hear. One man had crouched at eye level, shouting through the surf. "Control the panic, Carter. The moment you lose your breath, you'll spend your life chasing it." She hadn't surfaced until the 3rd minute, nearly blacked out, but she'd passed. Not because she fought the hold, because she waited for the right moment to rise. Back in the locker room, she exhaled once, slow and sharp, then slipped into her uniform, buttoned clean down the middle, clipped her badge into place. Outside, the sky shifted to lighter gray. By 0600, Rena stood in the training compound, not as an observer this time. She held a clipboard in one hand, a regulation binder in the other. The evaluation schedule for Phase 3, Breath Control Combat Assessment, printed in bold across the cover. She walked the yard before anyone else arrived, testing the mats, checking for tears, adjusting camera angles on the wall-mounted surveillance units. Deliberate, no wasted energy. She placed 3 cones in a triangle, marked the engagement zone, unrolled fresh gauze beside the first aid crate, all by regulation, all logged. By the time recruits began arriving, yawning and carrying coffee, she'd already logged the instructor pairing roster. Santos, Miller, and Greer were all assigned rotation slots. Captain Lowe wasn't due until late morning. That suited her fine. She stood at center mat, let the wind lift her collar. The wrapped ribs pulsed with every breath. She didn't shift her weight, didn't lower her eyes. When the first trainee stepped inside the ring, she said only one thing: "Let's begin." By 0730, the yard had gone quiet. Not silent, just cautious. The usual barked warm-ups were subdued, recruits stretched under angled sun, glances flicking toward the mat where Rena Carter stood, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable. The whiteboard to her left read in bold, Phase 3, Breath Control Combat Assessment. She turned toward the formation, 28 recruits in 2 lines, instructors behind them in a looser row. Today's exercise, she said calmly, is not about strength, not about speed. It's about control. Confused murmurs. You'll be paired off. Each of you will engage in 1-minute restricted breath contact. On command, you exhale, then begin. No talking, no preemptive movement. You engage only on contact. If you speak, breathe loud, or break form, drill resets. Santos laughed under his breath. She wants us to spar while holding our breath? She didn't acknowledge him. The goal, Rena continued, is to stay composed under deprivation. To fight with technique, not oxygen, because in the field, you won't always get to breathe before it begins. She looked at the roster. Instructor pairings go first. Corporal Santos, front and center. Real murmurs now. A few recruits turned their heads. Santos stepped forward, cocky as ever. Ladies first, he muttered. Rena stepped onto the mat. Clock starts on contact. They faced each other. No talking past this point. Exhale. They did. Rena moved first. Not aggressive, precise. She touched his sleeve lightly, then withdrew. His shoulders tensed. He waited. She touched again. This time his elbow. He grabbed. That was his mistake. She dipped low, used his momentum, shifted her weight sideways, and swept his stance with a pivot so fluid it looked rehearsed. He landed hard, flat on his back, air exploding out of him. She reset before he did. Round 2, she said. He got up slower. The second contact, he hesitated. She used it, grabbed his wrist mid-react, rotated his elbow, pivoted him off balance again. This time, she didn't drop him, just held him in suspension. His arm locked, then let go. He stumbled back, jaw tight. Next, Miller stepped up, muttering, "This is a joke." Rena didn't answer. Same rules. Contact only. 1 breath. She tapped his collarbone. He swung out of instinct. She slipped under the arc, redirected with 1 forearm to his chest, planted him on his heels. He tried again, grabbed her wrist. She rolled with it, stepped behind, elbow lightly touching his rib cage. A simulated takedown. Clean, legal, painful if applied for real. She backed away. Reset. By now, the recruits weren't whispering. They were just watching. One of them, Private Rosas, leaned toward the person beside her. How is she doing that? Timing, another whispered back. She's not fighting them. She's just there before they are. Chen, one of the older recruits, shook his head slowly. That's what real training looks like. No wasted movement, no ego. Near the back, Petty Officer Hayes stood with his arms crossed, studying the mat like he was watching a textbook come to life. He'd been through SEAL liaison training himself, knew what it took, and what he was seeing now wasn't luck. It was surgical. Greer hesitated at his name, looked at Santos. "Get in," Santos said quietly. He did. Rena touched his wrist. He twitched but didn't move. She tested again. Opposite hip. Still nothing. She waited, breath perfectly silent. Then, in one motion, she shifted inside his stance, gently pressed a finger against the small of his back, just enough to destabilize his weight. His balance crumpled. He caught himself. Barely. Rena gave him a nod. Better. The trio stood off the mat now, sweating, winded, wide-eyed. Santos wiped his face. "You planned this." She looked over calmly. "No," she said. "You did." Captain Lowe had arrived mid-drill, arms folded, saying nothing. But as the final pairing stepped onto the mat, he turned to an aide and murmured, "We'll need the footage." On the mat, Rena didn't break pace. She simply called out, "Next pair," and kept going. The operations trailer smelled like paper and old coffee. Captain Lowe stood at the center table, remote in hand. The footage from that morning looped on the wall screen, Santos dropping hard. Miller redirected into a pin. Greer caught mid-stumble. Then the moment no one had spoken about until now. Frame paused, blown up on screen. The corner of Rena's undershirt lifted as she adjusted gear, a faint purple blotch low on her abdomen, a bruise no one could deny. Lowe didn't speak, just let the silence do the work. Santos sat stiff in the corner, Arms folded, eyes avoiding the screen. Miller shifted nervously. Greer looked like he wanted to disappear. You're gonna tell me, Lowe said finally, voice flat, that this was a coincidence? No one answered. He turned to Rena. You want to file a complaint? No. Her voice was level. I already ran the drill. Lowe narrowed his eyes. You're saying that takedown session was... what? Your version of paperwork? I followed regulation, she said. All instructors are subject to combat evaluation under Phase 3 protocols. Your signature's on the sign-off sheet. He didn't refute it. They made contact first, she added, unreported, unprovoked. I chose not to escalate. I chose to teach. Lowe nodded slowly, jaw flexing. He looked at the screen again, hit pause. Santos opened his mouth. Don't, Lowe cut him off. Not a word. He turned back to Rena. You could have dragged this through every channel. Instead, you made it a lesson they'll never forget. She said nothing. Lowe crossed his arms. Corporal Santos, Petty Officers Miller and Greer, you're suspended from all instructional duties effective immediately. I'll forward the footage to command with a summary of what happened and what didn't. No one argued. He looked at Rena, not as a skeptical superior, as something closer to a peer. You held your breath longer than I would have. I've had practice, she said. He gave a faint nod. Get some rest. You've earned it. Rena turned and left without a backward glance. Outside, the desert light had turned gold. Long shadows stretched across the compound, and for the first time since arriving, the weight she carried didn't feel quite so silent. The sun folded itself behind the hills. Drills were over. Boots trudged to barracks. Showers hissed. Radios quieted. In the middle of Camp Eagle Run, the flag clicked against its pole. Metal tapping metal in the evening breeze. The mat from that morning still sat rolled in the center of the yard, half in shadow, half glowing orange from low sun. No one had packed it away. No one wanted to touch it. Recruits lingered in clusters, eating protein bars, pretending to check messages. Their conversations had shifted, less posturing. More questions spoken under breath. She didn't even raise her voice, one said. Did you see how she moved? Like she'd already done it 100 times. Private Rosas, one of the youngest, glanced at the mat. You think she knew they'd come at her? Chen just nodded. She didn't need to know. She just didn't flinch. Near the motor pool, Petty Officer Hayes sat with a few other instructors, the ones who hadn't been part of Santos's crew. One of them, Corporal Vega, shook her head slowly. I've been here 6 months, Vega said. Watched Santos run that yard like it was his personal kingdom. Nobody checked him. Nobody could. Hayes took a sip of water. She didn't check him with words. No, Vega agreed. She checked him with the same rules he was supposed to be teaching. That's what makes it hurt. Another instructor, young, barely 2 years in, spoke up. You think Command will actually do anything? Hayes glanced toward the operations trailer where the lights were still on. Lowe's not an idiot. He saw the footage, and Carter didn't give him a choice. She documented everything, ran it by the book, and made them look exactly like what they are. Which is? Loud, Hayes said simply. Loud and sloppy. And in this job, that gets people killed. The younger instructor nodded slowly, processing it. Across the yard, more clusters of recruits sat in similar silence. Not celebrating, not gossiping, just recalibrating, trying to figure out what they'd actually witnessed, because it wasn't a fight, it was a lesson, and the lesson was still sinking in. Rena walked past them without stopping, headed toward the equipment shed, fresh roll of gauze under one arm, steps even, jaw unreadable. A young Marine stepped forward, almost apologetically. Ma'am, she paused, turned her head. He looked 20 at most. New muscle, nervous posture, but respect in his voice. Can I ask you something? Ask. His eyes dropped briefly to her ribs, then up again. How'd you stay calm? After he stopped himself. After what happened? Rena studied him a moment, then said simply, because losing your temper hurts longer than losing your air. He didn't nod, he just understood. She continued toward the shed. Inside, she peeled off her jacket, unwrapped the compression tape, studied the bruise again in the mirror bolted above the sink. Deeper now, purple and black at the edges. She pressed gently, testing. It hurt, but not enough to stop her. She began rewrapping with clean gauze, slow, steady. Outside, boots scuffed gravel. Doors slammed. The flag finally lowered for the day. She didn't need the compound to thank her, didn't need apologies or vindication. The way they looked at her now said everything. Not with awe, not fear, with understanding. That silence wasn't weakness, it was discipline. And discipline in her world was the last breath before victory. Would you have kept your calm after a hit like that? Do you think control beats strength in a real fight? Have you ever seen silence change a whole room? Drop your answers in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story reminded you that sometimes the quietest person is the one you should never cross, make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on so you never miss the next mission. Share this with someone who still thinks composure means weakness. And while you're here, your next operation is already waiting on screen. Click it. I'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place, with a brand new mission.